Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's going to be a review of Ross Poldark, which I got, and I have seen some of the series, which I will say I enjoyed more than the book. So if you really love this book, I'm kind of at a loss to figure out why, because I really didn't connect with it, didn't really feel like the characters really came to life for me. But it's one of those books that is marketed more as a historical romance, but I did not feel the romance, and it has moments of very uninteresting plot, I guess, that seems like it doesn't really need to be there, and then very soap opera-esque, like, scenes where you're like, oh, that's very odd, like, nothing and then all in to just, like, the over-the-top soap opera, oh my goodness, this character and they're together, and it's, oh, the salaciousness, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I was really glad when I was done with this book, and I will not be continuing this series, especially because I read spoilers, and apparently it just doesn't get any better from here. So let's talk about it. So I have written notes. I'll just say, like, my overall review rating is going to be 2.5 stars. I don't think the writing is bad per se. I don't like the way that it doesn't seem like the story structure was well thought out, in my opinion. It goes from this, event, and then you'll have like a timeline that just kind of goes along, and then it will have an event, and then it will jump into now in the future, which can be very confusing because it's not necessarily like, okay, and then 5 years later. It's like, okay, this happened, and then you have to kind of guess, okay, well, where was this in the timeline? And let's go back and figure out what happened with this. And it's usually like something crazy happens, and then it's like, okay, hop into the future. Why would we do that? Why didn't we continue with this event? So I didn't like that. I felt like the main character, Ross, was very meh. Like, just meh. I didn't really, I think it's BBC series, he is portrayed much more, I feel like, dark, brooding. He's a very attractive actor, so that's in his favor, I suppose. But I feel like he had more personality, and in the book, he's very, like, not a bad guy, not a good guy. He's a guy. It was just a guy. And it just didn't do anything for me. I didn't feel like he was a great love interest or an interesting hero. He was just there. The other characters are very much meh as well. I will say the main girl, she has the most character arc, I would say, the most, like, progression of her character, but there's a reason, and it's not necessarily a good one. So let's talk about the actual storyline. I'll just, like, briefly go over it. It's about a man who is fighting in the Revolutionary War, which I'm guessing he's British, so he's fighting against the Americans, and I think they would say the American Revolutionary War. So yeah, he's fighting on the British side against the Americans, and he goes back home. His dad has died. His estate is in disrepair. He's, everything is kind of going bad for him. He finds out that the woman that he thought he had an understanding with is actually going to marry his cousin. So it's all kind of going downhill for Ross. This is Ross Poldark, the main character. And then it's kind of him trying to build back the estate, get things back under control, figure out his life, get kind of out of this sadness, and get over the girl that he thought that he was totally in love with. So that's the story. And like I said, it's meh, super meh. So now I'll get into specifics as much as I can and care to with this book. So we start off, we've got the Poldarks, the two brothers. So we start off with Joshua Poldark, who has Ross. That's the main character. And Joshua dies at the beginning of the story. Ross comes back. Estate is messed up. Over here you have Charles. Charles Poldark is I think he's widowed. His wife is never really mentioned. So they're both widowed, but it doesn't really matter. So you have Charles, who has Frances and Verity. And then Frances marries Elizabeth. So this is the two sides, and one of them, in the beginning of the book, like, Ross is the underdog. He's got nothing going for him. He basically comes home, and, like, the couple of servants that are left are drunk and in a stupor, and he's having to try and just get everything back in working order. He's, everything is just trashed. He comes back, and, like, his whole father's estate is just a mess. And he has no woman anymore. Poor man. And his cousin has got his woman, and they've got the money. They're mines because they are they work mines, like they own them, and then they have people that work for them. So their mines are doing well. There's the marriage that's coming up. So they're prospering over here, and he is not. So we start off with that. He comes back literally to a banquet with his, the woman that he thought was his one and only. It's their like engagement banquet. And yes, this is one of those like more soap opera-esque type moments where it's like, and they're together and she's marrying him and like, oh my gosh, and he's my cousin. And Elizabeth is one of those, she's the love interest that he had before and is now marrying his cousin. She's one of those delightful creatures of literature that is loved solely for being beautiful. Elizabeth has no character. What little we see of her character, she ends up coming off very superficial, and like she has been skating on her looks for her entire life. But I did not like her character at all. I felt like she was, the few times we see her like actually having a character, I was kind of disgusted by her because she definitely came off of this like, I'm in it for me. I'm in it for whoever I need to talk to, deal with, that's going to benefit me. And then, yeah, I didn't like her. So, yeah, she is there and they're having the banquet. Ross is all upset. And so this leads him, he goes back and deals with his servant, starts getting his stuff in better order. And then shortly after that, I think it's around the time of Frances and Elizabeth's wedding, he picks up this girl who's a street urchin, and she is 13. So Demelza, who's going to be another main character, comes back to work his estate and be like a kitchen maid at 13. Keep that in mind, 13, okay? Keep that in mind. Demelza is 13. She is a child. It literally talks about her and how he like takes off her clothes and washes her, and she is a child, okay? This will be important later. So life goes on. There are some other plot points like Jim and Jenny Carter, or not Carter, it's Martin. Jim and Jenny Martin are two people in the mining community. They work for Ross, and she's being bothered by this guy, Reuben something. And so they end up getting married, and like that protects her, poor women in this society. And then their like marriage and their household becomes another like plot point, which doesn't make any sense. These are people we don't need to care about or have any like, but it is another thing that they just throw in. So Jim and Jenny are, they get married. Reuben comes back and attacks Jenny and her baby later. It's a whole thing that I'm just like, this could have been tossed. And then Jim ends up going to prison for poaching. All of these plot points, no, I don't care. I don't care about these characters. They are like cardboard cutouts of characters. I did not have any interest in them. But the story progresses. It's like, okay, Ross is slowly getting people interested in his mind as like the people living there and working there, having their own lives and stories. Elizabeth has a child, so that's what's going on over there. Verity attempts to have a love affair, which goes very poorly for her because the guy she picks is he was a drunkard in his, I guess, previously, and pushed his wife, and I think she was pregnant at the time, but I don't remember if that was true or not, and then she died. So Verity knows how to pick him, and I'm not saying that like what happens with that situation was right, but I definitely understood where her father and brother were coming from, like, yeah, we don't want that for you. Like, they're way too controlling over her life, but you can see where the concern would be. So her brother fights a duel with the guy that she's trying to get with. His name is Andrew. And they both end up kind of getting like slightly wounded. And then it's like, well, you fought against my brother. I got to just go back with my dad and brother and serve them for the rest of my life. So Verity, poor thing. I liked her character. I wanted her to have more. I think she gets more in the next book. And she was definitely one of the better written characters. So that's what happens with Verity. So now time has passed and Demelza is 17. And one day her father comes back because she does have a family, but they're just not good. And she didn't have any, she wasn't treated well. So she's very happy living with Ross, being the kitchen maid. Her father comes back and is like, hey, come back. I'm reformed. I'm I think they're Methodists. And I've remarried and I'm devoted to sobriety and I'm going to treat you well and you can come back and live with us and your brothers and help us take care of our, the children we're going to have. So she doesn't want to do that. And so she thinks, I will sleep with Ross, and then he can't kick me out. And I think the author gets past the whole like Demelza being 17 and much, much younger than Ross in the whole like, well, it was all her idea. And I'm like, okay, yeah. So Ross had no choice. Like, she pursued him, and of course, you know, she has literally been his maid. They've had no romantic interactions, no longing, no passion, no like, oh, she's always been in love with him since he saved her at 13. None of this would be making this okay. But the author doesn't even feel the need to build that up. He doesn't feel the need to give us anything. It is nothing to, we slept together. Thankfully, we were spared any kind of graphic scene. It is just basically like they kiss and the next morning, and thank you for that, because I was not interested and I did not want that. I'm like, no, she's 17, you're an adult man, and she is your servant. Nothing about this is okay. And the fact that he picked her up at 13 and had her in his house until she's technically legal, you know, make of that what you will. I found the whole thing like, ew. Ew, ew. And I felt bad for Demelza because she felt like this was all she could do to stay there. And I don't think Ross had any thought of her other than like the immediate, you know, well, you know, she's a woman now and I'm a man and I have needs, which was gross. But also that this could really negatively affect her. There was already lots of gossip about her and him. And it's not like he has this whole thought process of what would happen to her. Now she's been with him. She's not a lady. She's definitely like a, you know, a woman that's just, you know, she has no background to really be with him. So elevating her in this way, and then he does eventually marry her because I guess that he feels that's the right thing, which is it? I mean, she doesn't really have any say. She is a servant. So all of this is like still, even in their marriage, under a master-servant relationship. It does change later. But I didn't feel it. There was no romance. It was anti-romance to me. I was like, this killed the romance. I felt nothing for this. So Demelza and him are together, and she does have a full, like, I feel like more of a character arc, because she goes from the kitchen maid at 13 to a full, like, by the end of the story, she is acting as the lady of the house, and she is kind of taking on the, like, okay, no, I'm Mrs. Poldark. I'm going to, you know, have my life be this way. I'm not going to go back to the way that I was. I'm learning and growing and changing into this, like, you know, society person, so that Ross won't be ashamed of her and he can take her anywhere. And she's definitely like thriving in that environment. So I guess good for Demelza. If you can get past their whole relationship, I couldn't. I thought it was gross, but whatever. So that kind of goes on. At the end of the story, Demelza and Ross are going to a Christmas party with Elizabeth and Frances and that family. So they're going to go visit the cousins for Christmas. She doesn't want to go, but she does, and she like does very well. And everyone really, you know, seems to like her, except for her and Elizabeth, who have like a thing. Obviously, she knows who Elizabeth is, and she knows that Ross was like pining over Elizabeth for years. Why? Couldn't say. That is a mystery to me, because there is no like backstory to the relationship other than remember what we said to each other, remember our promises. Oh no, you need to explain years of pining. You need to explain like him still drinking every night because he didn't get Elizabeth. I do not believe you. I do not believe you that he was so in love with Elizabeth based off of this. Like, you have not built it up. And I feel like the author doesn't feel like he needs to, and that's the problem. I'm like, I cannot buy into this. It's like Ross and Demelza, they have no buildup. They do get more like interactions. They go do things together, and he basically describes it as like, I'm in love with her because she makes me happy. Okay. Being with her makes him happy, so then he realizes he loves her, and that's good enough. But then he does describe the, like, he sees Demelza and Elizabeth. Elizabeth shows up. This is another, like, soap opera moment. Right after day after they sleep together, Elizabeth shows up and is like, hey, I'm really sorry that everything, like, and he's like, super happy that she's there. And they're going to reconcile. And he's like, oh, but it's too late because I slept with Demelza. I'm like, what's too late? So she came to reconcile. Would you what? Sleep with her? Take her from your cousin? What is this? And it's all like implied that something would have happened. And I'm like, what would have happened? Tell me. because that is trash behavior. I don't care if you reconcile. I don't care what is going on between you and Elizabeth. Like, how dare you? So anyway, that really annoyed me because I was like, stop having these moments where like she comes back and he's so sad and it's like they're torn up and they could have been. No, they could not. They could not have been. She has a child with his cousin and is married to him. And I know that this gets worse because I read spoilers, so I'm done with this series because no. So anyway, yeah, so that happens and he sees Demelza and Elizabeth together and describes Elizabeth as porcelain and Demelza as earthenware. And that got me. I was like, I am off this train. You don't deserve Demelza. She's like changing into like, oh, I'm like gonna own this. I am like the woman here. I'm gonna be, like educating myself. She's learning stuff all on his own. He does not help her. She learns music and all this stuff like to better herself. And she's like actually growing as a person. And Ross is just so meh. I'm over it. So I don't mean to like have a rant review about this. I just like, I didn't think I was so angry until I started thinking about it, but just, it wasn't for me. I do think there was some interesting stuff in there that I wish they would have stayed away from the mining, like storylines and then the poaching. They could have just had that be like okay, he found out that Jim went to prison because he was poaching. This did not need to be a whole chapter. The stuff with Ginny and the guy who's like trying to get her alone and assault her is, I just don't understand why we have that. I don't know if Ginny and Jim are going to be characters in a later book, but a lot of this felt like these were setups for a book that we weren't in. And I didn't like that because I didn't connect with anybody because it was so much, well, this is happening over here and this is happening over here. And here's Verity's little piece and here's Jim and Ginny and here's this person. And everyone gets a little piece so nobody is fully developed. And I don't want to read, I think this is quite a big book series and I'm not interested enough to keep going to figure out like what these characters are going to be about. Although like hopefully Demelza just owns it because she actually was a decent character. I know I'm not going to put this on her of like, oh yeah, she seduced Ross. I'm like, no, she's 17. And I know that the like author, who's a guy, wrote this of like, oh yeah, she really wanted to, and I'm like, no, she literally thought she had no choice. She would be kicked out unless she slept with him. That's really sad. Like her only worth to him, like she's lived there for years. This is her home, but she believes in her heart she would be kicked out and sent to people she doesn't even know and like hasn't lived with for years unless she makes herself worthy by sleeping with him. So I'm not putting anything on Demelza. Like, poor girl, this is a crap situation for her, and I didn't like it in the book. Didn't like the whole like thing. I will say the series, from what I remember, is quite a bit different and better. Like I said, Ross is portrayed like very brooding, like he's got much more going on from what I remember. And also Demelza is played by an adult actress. So that's how they skirted around the like, oh no, she's 13 when they first meet. If you see her as an adult actress and you don't say her age, then she is an adult. So it never comes off as like creepy or gross when you see him with an adult woman because it's not a child. So, I mean, that's a change that I think was definitely necessary. And I definitely enjoyed the like little bit of the series I watched much more than the book. I did like drop off my interest, I think, after a while. Like in the series, I think Demelza was pregnant and I quit watching. Like it wasn't one of my favorite series, but I do remember liking it much more than this book. So that's my thoughts on Ross Poldark. I am sorry for the rant. And this is kind of a new setup. I've got the office has been remodeled a bit. So hopefully this will work for filming in the future. And I'm currently finishing up a few things and hopefully I'll be able to film more in the future. But let me know what you're reading in the comments. And if you've read this book and you loved it, let me know. I know everybody's different. Everybody likes different things. I'm going to probably do a review of a few historical romances I did enjoy because I feel like there's something that's just lacking from this one. But let me know if you loved it or if you love this series, and I will talk to you guys in the comments. Thanks so much for watching.